लॉगिन करिए 𝑥change22.com पर, क्योंकि बड़े जिगर वाले यहीं पर मिलते हैं।
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Entrepreneurship Development Cell of St. Xavier's College, Autonomous, Kolkata, I would like to extend my gratitude to each one of you for being present here today. It is my honor and privilege to present to you Mr. Arjun Malhotra, co-founder of HCL Technologies and chairman of Magic Software Incorporated. Armed with an arsenal of knowledge and an unparalleled level of business building, Sir is truly a force to be reckoned with. An Indian entrepreneur, industrialist, and a philanthropist, he is truly an inspiration to many. Known as a serial technology entrepreneur, Mr. Arjun Malhotra has always been ahead of the learning curve with each of his companies and has showcased how necessary it has been to be an all-rounder in order to grow. He has been a revolutionary name across the technology and the service industry of the country for more than 47 years. We are beyond thrilled to have you join with us, sir, and are extremely thankful to you for taking out time for a session with us from your busy schedule. On behalf of everyone at Entrepreneurship Development Cell, I wish all attendees a great time learning. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Akriti. That was very kind. Makes me feel more important than I am, but thank you. So, I thought before we start, I'll give you a little background about myself. I am a Calcutta-born person, so I was born and brought up in Calcutta. In fact, very close to where you all are. My maternal grandfather, my Nana, was the director of the Indian Museum between Kid Street and Southern Street on Charangi. And the director's house is inside the museum. And that's where I was born, because when I was born, kids were born at home most of the time. And so I've never lived it down that I was born in a museum, but that's where I come from. 7 years in Calcutta, I actually went to Loreto Convent on Middleton Row and then went to St. Xavier's for about 6 months. And then my dad got transferred to Delhi. So I came into Delhi, 4 years at Columbus. And then my father got posted to the front for the 62 war. And my mother got she was a doctor from Calcutta Medical College. She got a Ford Foundation Fellowship to do postdoctoral work at the Harvard School of Public Health. So I ended up going to a boarding. I spent my last 4 years at the Doon School in 𝘪𝘮. And from there, then I came back to IIT Kharagpur, did my engineering, 5 years there. Unlike a lot of my classmates, I decided to stay back in India. I thought all my competition is going abroad. So, I'd have an easy time back home. joined a company called DCM, Delhi Cloth and General Mills Company Limited, as a senior management trainee. Spent 5 years there. Again, got a lovely break after my first year of training. DCM decided to get into electronics. They were in lots of other things. They were in food, in textiles, in rayon tire cord, in fertilizers, in chemicals, but they decided to move into electronics. And I was one of the few electronics engineers in the company. And so 1 year out of college, I was given the responsibility for setting up the national sales network, which I thought I would never have got anywhere else. And so did that for 4 years, made DCM a big brand in electronics at that time. But because India was a socialist country, we had something called the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, which didn't allow large private companies to get into new areas. And DCM was the 4th largest company in the country at that time on revenue. And so they decided not to get into computers because we had developed our own computer in DCM. So 6 of us decided to leave and get into computers. Microprocessors were just coming out. We thought they would change the world. And so we got out, no business plan, no money. When my grandmother gave a Barsati, which is where my son lives now, and we started the company in the Barsati, pulled all our money together. It was 1,75,000 rupees, out of which 1,25,000 went to buy an office in Bombay, because Bombay was the big commercial capital and you couldn't rent an office there. So really the working capital in HCL, or what Hindustan Computers Limited, what you now know as HCL, was 50,000 rupees. And this was in, I think we put the money in October 75. And now some 50 plus years later, 60 plus years later, I should say, I think they're worth $50 billion. So, you know, it's a big change from the 50,000 rupees that was put in at that time. But yeah, so I did HCL for 23 years. I thought I'd retire when I turned 50 or close to 50. It didn't work out that way. I made the classic mistake of not planning my retirement. So I got thrown out of the house in 10 days. My wife basically told me, you know, we've been married for 27 years. I married you for good and bad, but I didn't marry you for lunch. And so she said she'll pay for a business center. I should go and work from a business center. Ended up starting another company with some old HCL colleagues, which this is in 99 and 98, 99. Company called TechSpan that morphed into Headstrong. We focused on the capital markets, actually decided that instead of doing just IT services, we wanted to do consulting and use technology only as a tool to deliver the solution. So that worked quite well. We grew it to about 220 million, sold it in 2011, May 2011 to Genpact for 550 million. And I've been working with startups ever since, trying to focus on leveraging technology to change, to give better outcomes in healthcare and education to the economically underprivileged in India. So haven't been very successful in the education space. Because we decided to look at converting digital content into, you know, or adapting digital content for the learning handicap. Unfortunately, India is still not ready for the learning handicap, but we have a fairly large market in the US, and that's where Magic Software is actually focused and seen as a leader. The other thing is in healthcare, and healthcare, yes, we've been quite successful in India, where we are able to, and I can give you that whole story. Basically, and you know, I'll do it when you ask a question, I guess, but we try to see how we could save doctors' time so they could see more patients, because there seems to be such a shortage of doctors in India. And so using AI and stuff, we actually do diagnostics. And today we are saving doctors who are using it 30 to 50% of their time. And as we use machine learning to improve the capabilities of the back-end system, we expect it to go to 70 to 90% in the next few years, so that doctors will have a lot more time as more and more patients come into the healthcare system, especially from rural areas, and especially when they come on through the phone or video, telemedicine, as you all know. So that's what I've been doing. I try to keep myself busy. I'm not allowed to retire, as my wife says. She doesn't want me at home. So I just make sure I bug other people and, as I said, keep busy. I'm happy to answer questions.
All right, sir. So the first question that I want to ask you is something that I'm sure everyone has in their mind. So how did you do it? What was the story behind HCL, and how does it feel today to be the co-founder of one of the biggest companies in the world?
I don't think we ever thought of it that way. Our motivation, see, none of us came from a business family. And in those days, having a secure job with a large company was considered the best thing that could happen to you. Right? Security was very important. So when I left, my parents were quite supportive. My wife, both of them were working. My wife was working. I already had a daughter. My logic was that, look, all the other five had their own logic. Mine was that, look, I know I can get a job. I'll get a job if this thing doesn't work. So I'll give it a try for 1 year. And, all it does is it'll sort of cramp my lifestyle a little bit because there's one less income coming into the home. And I'll probably have some mud on my face if it fails. But I didn't think that there would be a problem getting a job, So that was my confidence, let me put it that way. But the bottom line was microprocessors were really coming out. And, our competition was big companies like IBM and ICL, which was the big British company in computers. And they were selling old generation equipment in India. And we thought technology, everyone would understand technology and buy it. Completely wrong. Because when we did come out with our technology, trying to get people away from IBM was very, very difficult. Because the IBM sales strategy was what I call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So that's what they created in the customer's mind. HCL was just a simple startup. And we chose the name Hindustan Computers Limited because we felt that when people buy computers, they want a solid company behind it. And, you had Hindustan Machine Tools, Hindustan Air, all that stuff. And you had to pay a fair amount of extra money to get the name because you had to have your capital, authorized capital had to be larger, on which you paid the register of companies more money to register the company. We did that specifically. And of course, we had a lot of problems. I can tell you, when we started, all of us came from the field side. Very few of us came from the production side of the business. Fortunately for us, the late Mr. 𝑉𝑒𝑑 Luthra of Televista, which was a big TV company, came to us and told us, I make calculators, they don't seem to sell. So why don't you sell them for me? And we'll strike a deal. I'll tell you my bill of material, my production cost. You tell me your selling cost. There's obviously a profit in the middle. We'll divide it by half. I'll give you a 90-day hundi. That means you pay me after 90 days. And after 90 days, we'll reconcile our books and adjust whatever thing has to be adjusted in terms of who spent more or who spent less, etc., etc. So technically, look at it. We got product, we got 90 days credit. And so, you had a company. In fact, I remember there were 6 of us. We decided, it could get depressing if things don't work out. So 2 people stayed in Delhi, 2 went to Bombay, and I came to Calcutta with Pammi Puri, late Pammi Puri now. And so I remember going to the Televista office on Madden Street. It was called Alpha Radio. I don't know if it's still there. And we had decided to change the price of they were priced too high, their electronic calculators. So the printer calculator, they were selling at 7,000. We had decided to price it at 5,500. There was a fair amount of margin. So I went to the office. They had a demo machine. I cleaned it up and I asked them, they had a local sales guy. I said, what's your hottest client for a printer calculator? And he said, Das Reprographics on 𝘪𝘚 Road. So I said, let's go. And he said, what's the problem? He said, they are willing to pay 6,000 rupees. Our price is 7,000 rupees. So, we haven't made the sale. So I said, let's go to 𝘪𝘚 Road. I go there. I give them a demonstration. They say, yeah, we like this. So I said, what will it take for you to buy it? So he said, if you give it to me for 6,000 rupees, I'll buy it. So I told him, look, I'll give it to you for 5,500 rupees, but I want the check right now. And so the guy said, okay. And so we gave him the calculator. He gave me the check. I caught the Kalka that evening from Calcutta. I paid 8 annas from my pocket to get a seat because the company couldn't afford it. Landed up at Delhi at night, came home. The office was in the Barsati of where I was staying. In the morning, I go to the office and I give them the check. And they say, we haven't got the company name registered as yet. So they had to scramble to get the company name and the same name as the check, because otherwise the check wouldn't have got cashed. That's how we started. And that was HCL actually. It was Microcomp in those days. It morphed into HCL in August of 76 because, we traded in calculators. I think in 3 months, we had enough money to invest into R&D to develop our own computer. We recruited 2 more guys who worked with us in HCL, gave them some equity. Got them in to do our design. I came back to Delhi in 6 months, and I promised my wife that if things work out okay, we'll take a holiday. So in 76 summer, we went off to the US for 4 weeks. In the meanwhile, we had our computer ready, but the government had decided to restrict licenses to state and public sector only. So we actually signed a joint sector with the government of UP called UP. It was called UP Electronics Corporation. You know them as Uptron today. We were the first company that signed with them, and that's how we got our own name. We got Hindustan Computers Limited. The structure was 26% they would earn, for 25% we would own, and 49% was supposed to go public. But the total equity was only 20 lakhs. So the amount that had to go public was 9.8 lakhs. And the cost of going public was more than 9.8 lakhs. So ultimately, indirectly, we had 74% and they had 26%. And we bought that back over time. We bought the 16% of that 26 back, I think a few years later for 20 odd lakhs. And the last 10% was a problem because all the other units were making a loss. And, they said, obviously, we also need to be a part of a profit-making company. But finally, they got a new CEO who wanted to show a profit. The only way he could have shown a profit was if he sold our shares back to us. And we didn't have the money. He wanted 127 lakhs, 1,27 lakhs. And this is a long time ago. So we went to State Bank of India and SBI Capital Markets. The MD there was a gentleman called, I think his name was SM Basu. And we persuaded him to lend us the money on the understanding that we will give it as bonus to our employees. And every year, because the interest was 18%, the price of the bonus stock that the employees would get would go up by 18%. And, because that was, you call it stock options today, we had no idea what that meant at that time, but that's what we ended up doing with the strike price that was different. And I think Mr. Basu, because he was from Bengal and, with Bengal's great communist kind of background, socialist background, I think he liked the idea. And so that's how we got, that's how 100% of HCL came out of government hands and went into private hands, basically. So, sorry, a long answer to a short question, but that's how HCL started.
Thank you so much, sir, for your answer. I am Aryan Agarwal, and I would be moderating along with Bharat. So, sir, we got a question from the audience from the representative from 𝘾𝐞. So she wanted to ask, was there any time when you felt like you will fail? Like if you will fail, what will happen? So if you felt like that, how did you exactly handle that particular situation?
Yeah, so very often we sort of, HCL came up in the license Raj. So I'll give you an anecdote. When we made our first 8-bit computer, the way we used to do it was we would take a 30% advance with the order because that covered the bill of materials by and large and the production cost. And then the customer would come to our factory. We would show him the computer. He would then give us a check for 70%. Then we'd pack the computer and ship it to him. So our first customer was a trademark attorney, well, more than trademark attorney, but they used to do that kind of stuff here in Delhi called Remfry and Son. And Jyoti Sagar, who's still a friend, he comes to our factory in Noida, gives us the check, and we are packing the machine. When someone comes and asks us, have you paid your excise? I tell you, we were naive. We had no idea what this excise was. So we asked him, what's excise? He said, it's a production tax you have to pay in India to the government if you make anything. So he said, sure. We called the excise inspector and said, have a look. This is our microprocessor-based mini microcomputer, whatever you call it. Tell us what the excise is. And excise is paid in multiple ways. One way is to pay it ad valorem, which is a percentage of the invoice price. The other one was transformers, for example, are paid 4 annas a kilo by weight. So we told him, have a look. He went through the whole book. He couldn't find any microprocessor, mini computer, nothing that was in the excise book. So he said, I don't know what to charge you. Said, then what do we do? He said, you write a letter to your administrative ministry. They will write a letter to the finance ministry. Then the finance ministry will give a notification, and that's the basis on which we think. Told him, are you mad? I've got a customer, I've got to pack the machine, write to one ministry, write to another ministry, 4 or 5 months. I mean, we don't have the time. So he said, look, no, don't worry. This is revenue generating for the government. They do it in 1 day. So we said, okay. And Department of Electronics had just been started. You know it as MeitY today. But electronics was supposed to be the future. It had just been started in India. So we called them and they gave us an appointment to meet with them on a Saturday. Everyone used to work half-day Saturdays in those days. And so I still remember Saturday, we go to their office, we give them a full presentation on what we're doing, and we tell them, please write a letter to the Ministry of Finance. What we are told is that the microprocessor policy has still not been decided. We expected to take 4 years. So please come back 4 years later, and then we'll write that letter to the ministry. So, we sort of go back, very depressed, say, hey, what do we do? I mean, it's like, hello, if I can't sell my computers, I've taken money from people, I bought the parts, stuff like that. So everyone decided that let's take that excise book home, each of us, and said, let's look at it. Maybe we'll come up with a bright idea. Now, import substitution was a big thing in India because dollars were short. We still see some of that today. And anything that was imported, they immediately put it in the excise book because they wanted to encourage someone in India to make it. So we used to import electromechanical accounting invoicing machines from East Germany from a company called Robotron. And there was a photograph of this Robotron electromechanical accounting invoicing machine, which had a keyboard, had a printer, and it had a table. And so, we called the excise guy on Monday and said, have a look at this photograph, have a look at our computer. Isn't it the same thing? He said, this is the same thing. So we cleared our computers out as accounting invoicing machines. And we did that for 4 years. We even sold one to the Department of Electronics. That microprocessor policy took 4 years to come out. So, when you talk about, hello, what was the environment like and what problems you had, just to give you an idea, those were the kind of problems we had to live with. But I think the never say die spirit, I don't think in HCL we thought anything was impossible. I can't think of, we thought we should own 100% of the market. We didn't, loss was not acceptable. We did lose orders. But there was a lot of heartburn when someone lost an order. So we sort of wanted 100% of the market. That's the way the company culture was. And it's something I think people remember even today.
Thank you so much for that answer, sir. So our next question is from our audience at YouTube. One of them wants to ask, so what is the right time for a startup to raise funds for minimal dilution?
So that's two things you've got to remember. So, we bootstrapped HCL. So, and I can tell you for the first 10, 15 years of my life, I spent 60% of my waking time, thinking time, worrying about cash flow. And, I don't want to wish that on anyone else. So, even if you dilute the company, it all depends. What are you planning? Are you planning to have a big company? Then how does it matter if you dilute? If you own 10% of $1 billion company, life's not going to change. If, however, you're looking at a small company, then you have to look at bootstrapping it to a larger extent. So just think of how you want to look at your company. Are you going to scale it to a size where it's going to be really large, where dilution, how does it matter, right? Who owns how much of the company? Even a few percent of a big company gives you enough wealth to make you happy. And let me tell you this, that beyond a certain point, it's only mental. How much can you spend? I mean, think about it. How much money do you need to live a comfortable, happy life, right? Maybe stretch it to 3x or 4x, whatever the number is. You really don't need more than that. And, it's nice to have it. You can give it away and stuff like that. But if you're looking at, money also gets quote unquote power. And so if you're looking at, hey, the money should generate power for me, I should become big in FICCI or CII or whatever. Yes, then you need to show a big amount of wealth sitting behind you. You need to get onto these Forbes lists and, stuff like that. But ultimately, money should give you peace of mind, which it rarely does. And so you should look at it in terms of, this is all I need, this is all I really want to spend. And, sometimes go back and read. I don't know how many of you read our old scriptures. You should. There's a lot of knowledge in them. And at some point in one of the scriptures, and I forget which one, it says that ultimately when you're dead and gone, all you leave behind are your children and your reputation. And so if you live your life looking at things that way, when to take money, when not to take money becomes fairly unimportant. Take it at a time where you don't spend too much mental time worrying about your cash flow. That's what I would say. And you decide what that time is and how much worry you're willing to take, And so there's no answer of this is the time or that's the time. You have to take that decision depending on how much stress you're willing to take on cash flow and how much you're willing to dilute. It just boils down to that.
Thank you for your answer, sir. So, sir, I have a question. So, sir, you co-founded the HCL group in the mid-1970s. So, at that particular time, there was not a lot of exposure which was given to the IT sector in general. And at the same time, there was a big cloud about the viability of the IT sector, whether it could be the next big thing as it is right now. At the same time, the government gave a lot of preference to capex industries and the public sector banks. So did this serve as a psychological barrier in the initial stages of operation? Like when you started operations, did it psychologically impact all the people in HCL technology?
Not really. And, HCL technologies came up much later. I think basically somewhere in the late 88, 89 timeframe. But HCL, so when I got into electronics, it was exciting. Things were happening every day, and you had to educate everyone. All the buyers had to be educated. So that was really exciting because you went out not just as a salesman, but you went out as someone who educated people and made their operations more efficient. In fact, a lot of times you're telling them the benefit of an electronic calculator over a mechanical calculator, that kind of thing. So that was one. Second is, yes, you're right. When people wanted jobs, the preferred jobs were Larsen & Toubro, Hindustan Levers, stuff like that. IT was a high risk job. So really what the people we ended up recruiting were the people who were willing to take risks, who were looking at a new area, wanted to come into something that was more risky than getting into a levers or a L&T, which were available in those days. And that is why you see a lot of people who joined HCL in the old days. There are about 20, 30 companies that are being led by people from HCL today. You look at Tech Mahindra, I can name a whole lot of them, where ex-HCL people are now CEOs of those companies. And that's basically because they were risk-taking people. They came into an industry, they grew with it, and obviously did a great job, and are continuing to do a great job. And so I don't know if you called it a problem. We saw it as an opportunity, because I could go in and recruit people who wanted to work in a greenfield, riskier kind of proposition. In fact, I remember in '76 when we went to IIM Calcutta to recruit. That time we were paying people more than what Tata Administrative Service or Citibank was going to pay them, right? And in our pre-placement talk, we said, look, I don't know if the company is going to be alive a year later, but we can have a lot of fun in the 1 year, and you'll have a lot of learning. So we didn't position it as a job. We said it's an adventure. You want to come with us on this adventure, then join us. But and actually, I think only 5 people from that whole class didn't apply for the interview. And Shivnadar and I took the interview, and because we were paying so much money at that time, we decided that if I had to look at him and ask him, what do you think of this or whatever, then the person was a reject. So we ended up taking 6 people, and they were IIT, IIM type people. And within 6 months, they were running regions for us, because I pulled back from Calcutta. So when you looked at who was running, the Rajiv Talwar ran West at Bombay, Umesh Rakra ran Calcutta, Arun Seth, who recently retired as chairman of BT India, ran Bangalore. So it was, we got some really smart people, and we enabled them very early in their careers. And a lot of them stepped up and did a great job. And I think, I still believe that's the model we should follow, that people should follow. You've got young, smart people, they think out of the box, they'll give you new ideas. And you've got to listen to them. I think what happens in most, how do I put it? Most people who start companies think that there's no one smarter than them, which is not true. You have to go out and recruit people who are smarter than you, make them part of your team, and then listen to them, right? That I think if you ask me what's the one big thing I learned in IIT, my 5 years in IIT, is I learned how to survive with people who are smarter than me. And that's paid me very good dividends through my life.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is from Mr. Abhishek Banerjee, who is the founder of Lotus Dew, which is a startup that has come on board with us. Sir, they also ran a SEBI licensed business, and he wants to ask that, was starting a licensed and its constraints help you think out of the box? If there were no licensing constraints, would you think the outcome would be different?
Yeah, absolutely. You'd have, a license restricts you. Whatever the restriction, it's a restriction. And obviously, if there were no restrictions, you could do a lot better, hypothetically, right? Now, I don't know what the restrictions are in this case or whatever, but yes, and life also changes. So let me give you another anecdote. So banks didn't allow computers. Their union said no to computers because computers are supposed to take away jobs. It took them many, many years. We went through a whole generations of computing equipment. Then we came to the PC and PC XT. Then it came to the PC 80. Now 80 was the 286 base. That's when the banks suddenly decided, they agreed that they would have these machines because of the convenience, but they wouldn't let us call them computers. So the same machine was relabeled as what we call ALPMs, Advanced Ledger Posting Machines. And that's how the banks got them in. And the public sector banks in India decided that they would buy from only 2 vendors. They chose the vendors. HCL was one, and I think Usha or something. There was a group in Delhi, Vinay Rai, Usha group. They were the others. And the way it was split was 60% of the numbers were bought from us and 20%, 40% were bought from them. And so they decided in their wisdom that why am I getting a sales force? So they cut out all their overheads and said, we'll only sell to banks. The volume's pretty nice. After buying 2,000 of these ALPMs, the banks decided to take a break and look at the productivity of these machines before they bought any more. And so, we continued. We had a lot of other business. Usha, of course, shut down because they had only one customer and the customer stopped buying. Now, at that time, to encourage use of computers by banks and other people, the government had reduced the import duty on memories, DRAMs as we call them, dynamic RAMs, to 25%. Okay. Now, when the banks stopped buying, the government, and budget cycles were annual for the government. So every year on 28th February, they would do a budget, and your game plan for the next year, you would have to change based on what the budget was. You could never think 4 or 5 years. You had to think every year. So they decided that why are we losing revenue in terms of customs duty on memories? So they kicked the DRAM price up to 140%, or the duty, not the price, the duty up to 140%. So Usha was sitting, these guys were sitting on lots of memories that they'd imported to make machines at 25%. They sold them in the market at 140% and actually made more money than HCL did selling computers. So just to tell you how government licensing used to change things for people in a way. But that was the way it was in those days. And that's how you had to live your life. I mean, the Apple distributor, a company called Rabba Contel, what he would do was buy a photo typesetting machine. The duty on photo typesetting machines was 35%. The duty on electronic components for computers was 140%. So he would get photo typesetting machines with multiple Apple terminals, fully assembled. He would scrap the photo typesetting machine and sell the Apple terminals as Apple computers. Obviously at a much better price than we could, because we were importing components at 140%. And we used to crib to the government every year about this and say this loophole has to be closed. It took them something like 10, 15 years to close it. Now, whether someone was encouraging them not to close it or not, I have no idea. And I don't want to get into that controversy, but that was the way life worked. And so as I always say, as an entrepreneur or in life, you have to play, or you have to live life with the cards you're dealt. You can't sit back and say, I wish I had a joker, or I wish I had a pair, or I wish I had a trail, or whatever. Those are the cards you're dealt. You have to live your life and play your game accordingly.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, at that time, so like you mentioned in the introduction, so like the presence of the MRTP Act, the Monopolies and Trade Restrictive Practices Act, along with that, there was the existence of License Raj. So we assume that there was a lot of government bureaucracy that you had to navigate when you started the company. So, sir, we have got a question in the chat box. So, sir, how exactly did you manage to navigate through those particular government bureaucracy and become the giant you are right now? What steps did you take to ensure that wouldn't be a problem?
Nothing very much. We were lucky compared to the other industries. Government regulatory cycles were annual. Fortunately, technology cycles were faster than annual. So they were always regulating stuff that didn't matter that much. I remember at one time, the government thought that they would ban the import of 64K DRAMs because semiconductor complex used to make 16K DRAMs. Right? I always tell people that was the closest I came to becoming a smuggler, because all you had to do was go to Singapore with a briefcase, fill it up with DRAMs and get it back, right? If they had done that, because you can't make computers much larger, because the memory, you have many more memory chips, they'll break down more frequently, there'll be lots of problems. Fortunately, Dr. Seshagiri, who was then Director General of NIC, the equivalent to the Secretary to the Government of India, got some sense into them. But he said that, look, whatever semiconductor complex makes goes into watches and stuff like that. There is no capacity for them to make it for computers. So you'll have to import in any case. So you might as well let them import 64K DRAMs rather than the equivalent number of DRAMs in 16K, which will cost you a lot more, and more foreign exchange will go. So fortunately, that was scrapped and it didn't come in the budget. But that, as I always say, that's the closest I came to becoming a smuggler.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is from the YouTube chat box. Sir, a viewer wants to know that the need for a technological base in the startup world today has skyrocketed, and various sectors has seen an amalgamation along with the tech sectors. And since you yourself have been in the sector for more than 47 years, what is one thing that individuals who do not have a tech background can do to improvise in the startup culture and to strive in the startup culture today?
So a couple of things. One is you don't need to have a tech background to learn how to do programming. The best programmers are what we call high school graduates who haven't gone to college but learn programming as a language. And I think NIT does a good job of getting people to do that kind of work. I don't know other people, but I know NIT does a good job. Right. The other thing is, look, more important than knowing how to make a computer, the hardware and software part, is how do you use them? You can become a great application person. So if you work in an industry and most computer programmers know programming, they don't know in the industry how an industry works, what are the issues and stuff like that. And in fact, today you have a word called data scientist. A data scientist is the person who understands math and stuff, understands the industry, and understands a bit on computers, so that he can do analytics based on data that's collected from the industry to sort of make the decision-making smarter, more effective, whatever word you want to use. Right, so there are lots of things that people who don't come with a computer background can do and play a very important role. In fact, computers, I think you mentioned, they've become infrastructure. They're like roads. When we talk of broadband, we talk of it as the computer highway, and that there are applications that run on the highway. So instead of cars and trucks, you have applications that run on the, sort of broadband highway. And those are the words you start to use when you use computers. It's nice to see they're becoming all pervasive, because when we started the company, while I said my parents and all didn't say anything, they were encouraging. My uncles and aunts thought I was crazy to leave a comfortable job with a big company where I was supposedly doing well and get into business that they had no idea about. So to get them off my back, I would say, microprocessors are going to change the world. And so everyone thought you're high on pot or something, so they'd leave you alone. And many, many years later, I was going to Delhi airport to pick up someone from the international. And when I was getting my parking ticket, that guy in that parking booth had a PC and he was issuing the ticket out of the PC. And I thought to myself, my God, we have changed the world. If someone like that in a parking booth had to have a PC to give you your parking ticket. And yeah, that was a great feeling. I still remember, I felt really good. I said, I used to do that to get people off my back so that they leave me alone when we started. And to actually see it happen many, many years later was a great feeling.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, the next question is from the YouTube audience. It is from a student of St. Xavier's College itself. So, sir, he's asking that you have completed your BTech in 1970 and post that you have 5 decades of corporate experience. So, sir, what would be one advice which you will give to the young generation on building a rock solid corporate career, a career one like which you had?
So I think important thing is to keep multiple things. One is you must keep updated with whatever industry you want to be in. Yeah, I've been fortunate. I've been in IT all 50 years of my working life. And one of the things about the IT industry is that it changes really quickly. So if you don't keep up, you don't read, you don't find out what's going on, you can become irrelevant very quickly in this industry. Now, that may not be true for lots of other industries, but it's happening nearly everywhere. I look at medical today. If you look at the whole medical industry, look at what genetics is doing to them, and I can talk about a lot of things that are happening there. And I guarantee you 10, 15 years from now, the way you look at medications, the way you look at, vaccines, mRNA is coming up, the way you look at everything is going to be very different. And if doctors don't keep themselves updated, they will become redundant, right? They'll become dinosaurs of the past. And that's coming up true in nearly every industry. I mean, look at publishing, your books. The people who run most publishing companies come from printed books, yet digital content is becoming more and more important in a lot of areas, right? And why is it becoming important? Because the users want it. And I can today tell you, when you take a book digitally and look at it, how much time you spent in the book, how much time you spent on each chapter, on each page, etc., etc. And that data coming back to me as the publisher gives me a lot of information about what's important and what's not important, and how to do things and become more cost effective and value accretive to my customers. So, there's a lot of that stuff that's going to happen. I think all you've got to do is A, stay updated in your area. B, make sure you're inquisitive. Don't accept anything. Ask questions. Look at every process. In fact, I tell people that when you get up in the morning and you get ready to go to college, and that's what I think most of you do, you want to sleep a little more, 5-10 minutes more. I mean, everyone wants that, but you'll get late for college. So why don't you look at what are the things you do in what sequence before you get to college, and see if you can make it more efficient so you get 5 minutes more of sleep, right? If you start thinking of everything you see and do in that particular way, you'll build efficiencies into whatever you're doing, into every process. It's just a way of thinking. It's, a lot of times, and when you go to companies, you'll find people saying, this has worked for 10 years, why should I change? But you have to become the agent for change. Sometimes it's really frustrating. You get a kickback from your manager a lot of times saying, who do you think you are? I've been here for so many years, blah, blah, blah. But, hey, if you don't change, or if you don't look at the efficiencies you can create by thinking of those processes, it's not going to help your career. So, and obviously you have to find a way to keep your boss happy. When I first started, I was sharing a room in DCM with a gentleman called 𝘃𝐺𝐽, who was 10 years senior to me from IIT Bombay. He was head of production. And he told me that the way to go up in life is really simple. Number one, keep the telephone operator happy. And in those days, we had patch boards. So if you wanted a call, the telephone operator had to patch you in, otherwise you didn't get a call. Second is keep the chaiwala happy. Otherwise, you won't get your tea in the office, and you'll get tired quicker. And number three, keep your boss happy. So, I mean, obviously those things have changed now because the environment has changed. But you need to look at those 2-3 points that you need to follow to be successful in whatever you're doing. Forget career; it's in whatever you do.
Right. Thank you for that answer, sir. So the next question is from one of the startups present here. Sir, the startups feel that today in the startup ecosystem, it looks like the VC firms believe more in the IITs and MIT alumnus when it comes to giving funding or giving investment. So what is your take, or what do you have to say about this?
And yes, it is a bias, and I agree with them that it is a bias, and the bias is only, and that happens even when people are recruiting from companies. They tend to pay more, for example, if you're from one of those leading institutes. It's true all over the world. I mean, it's true with Stanford and Harvard and in universities like that in the US. But the important thing to remember is the reason they do that is because they think there's some higher level of intelligence, blah, 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 whatever you attribute it to. And that lowers the risk of the failure for the project. So as long as you can overcome that mental issue in VCs or whoever the funding donors' heads, you should be able to capture that. So, again, it's important. When you look at people, what do you look at when someone is straight out of college? You look at his academic record, you look at his extracurriculars, and you try and see what they did to give you an idea of what kind of person he is. In India, we even look at kind of family you come from, just to get an idea of what kind of persona you are. A lot of that is banned in the US. You can't ask a person if he or she is married, you can't ask them their name, you can't ask, there are lots of things you're not allowed to ask in an interview. In India, we are fortunate that we can ask a lot of questions and work much, how should I put it? We can work much harder to see the right cultural fit of that person with the company, so that there's a higher chance that the person is successful in the job that you give them compared to the US, where, I can't compliment someone. If I'm in the coffee room and someone's wearing a nice colored dress or whatever, and you say, oh, that looks nice, that can get you into trouble in the US, which is strange and ridiculous, but that's the way it is. Whereas in India, when you do that, unless you're doing it with the wrong intent, people appreciate a compliment and in fact tend to like it to some extent. So it's, different cultures, you handle things very differently in terms of how you look at things and how you do things. And, it's again, when I went to the US, my daughter had to get a driving license, or, not a license, she had to get insurance for driving. And she was a first-time driver. And the insurance guy asked for her grades. And I said, why do you need her grades? And he said, oh, because good students get a lower insurance because they're considered good students if their grades are good. And I thought to myself, that's logical. But in India, if someone asked me for my kids' grades, I would get really upset. I think it's very personal. Whereas here it's very easy to comment, at least up in the north, if someone you're looking very healthy, which basically means you put on weight. Whereas in the US, you'd never say a thing like that. So it's culturally completely different. And you've got to be sensitive to it. Plus, you've got to worry about the language. You can't tell someone the phone is engaged. You've got to say it's busy. They don't understand. Engaged is, you can't say I've passed out. That means you probably collapsed. You graduated. So, you've got to, the Queen's English doesn't really work in the US. You've got to change and you've got to be sensitive to that. That's exactly how you've got to be when you get people in a company. You've just got to be sensitive to their backgrounds and sensitive to what they'll be sensitive to based on, you've got their resume. So, when you manage people, and, one thing I want to tell startups, that while you're small, it's nice, it's fun. When you get bigger, a lot of your time is going to go managing people, not really doing very much else. And as you get really big, that becomes your primary job, is how to motivate and manage people to make sure that they deliver, rather than you're trying to do everything yourself.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, we have one last question, if you don't mind. So, sir, don't you think that on the other hand, as an investor, investing in the business of an IIM alumnus, since he has a lot of backing which he has, since he has been a part of such an esteemed university, he may not be that enthusiastic compared to a person from an average college who has a lot on stake, a lot to prove. A person from an IIM, he might not have that much to prove because he has achieved a significant amount in his life. Whereas a person from a standard college, an average college, he might have a lot to prove. So, sir, do you think the spirit in entrepreneur matters at that particular point of time?
So two things I'll answer there. You asked two questions. So first thing is, by getting into IIT and IIM, you haven't proved anything. You just proved that you could do the exam well. I think one of the big, I don't know IITs, I don't know IIM. One of the big things I tell people at IIT Kharagpur when I talk to them is that this is not your end all in life. You've only just started your journey. Just getting into IIT doesn't mean now I've ended everything kind of thing. I don't need to do anything else. So the other thing I say is that, look, ultimately, it's not where you're from. Yes, let's say that when you come from and I'll use the same IIT and IIM, you are seen as having an advantage. And yes, to an extent, you have an advantage. But basically, if I present myself right, if I show I have the right passion, if I have the right idea, if I show the right commitment, I can overcome that handicap that I'm starting with. So in a way, I would think you're right. It should motivate me to try harder, which always shows up. I mean, you can see that when I just did an interview for a startup, they're looking for a COO, and we interviewed 3 people. The other 2 people were obviously probably a better fit in terms of what their background was to the job that they were supposed to do. But one guy who came out of a sales job, hasn't handled accounting or HR or whatever, but was very passionate about what he wanted to do. So I gave him, actually, if I had to choose, I'd take that person, because that I want that passion that will help him, learn and solve those problems. So if I had to invest, and I don't invest, my son does, but if I had to invest in a startup, I would look passion, I think. I want you to want to change the world. Obviously, you should have a good idea. And if you do that, you're going to be happy doing whatever you do, whether it's wildly successful or not. Even if it fails, at least during the time you worked there, you had job satisfaction. You thought you were doing something good, and you learned something from it, rather than getting depressed about, I didn't do this or this couldn't happen or whatever. So if you have a passion for doing whatever you do, and that's why you appreciate people like missionaries, people who are, who come in, they have a passion for what they're doing. You've got to appreciate it. They're getting no real benefit other than the satisfaction of whatever they're doing. And that really is ultimately what I think entrepreneurs have to have. I rate passion as the most important. You have to want to change the world. You have to want to make a difference in some way to some people. And I would say this, if you start a company with the thought of, I'm going to make money, then I guarantee you there's a very high probability it won't make money. You've got to start a company with wanting to change the world, do something. And if you can make that difference in whatever you're doing, wealth will, or whatever, will come automatically. It doesn't, and wealth doesn't have to be money. It could be recognition. It could be lots of things. And so I would really suggest you should people who are starting up, entrepreneurs should look at it that way, rather than just say, I'll make money, where it's not going to happen more often than not.
So thank you so much for that answer. With this, we come to the end of all the questions for today's session. Now we have Utkarsh from our team for the closing speech.
Thank you, everyone.
After such a spellbinding session, it is an absolute honor and my pleasant duty to propose the vote of thanks today. With immense appreciation and gratitude, I thank Mr. Arjun Malhotra for being present with us today and taking out time from his busy schedule to furnish the young minds and startup founders with such practical and valuable insights about his life lessons and experiences. We are sure that the learnings from this session will act as a guiding light and hold our audience in good stead for the future. A special mention to our respected principal, Reverend Dr. Dominic Savio S.J., and our vice principals, Reverend Father Joseph Kulandai, Reverend Father Peter Arokiam, and Professor Bertram De Silva for encouraging us to pursue greatness and live up to the great Xaverian reputation. I would further like to thank our faculty advisor, Dr. Arup Kumar Mitra, for his leading supervision and inspiration at every juncture. A big thank you to our audience for being patient, interactive, and putting forth such compelling questions. Last but not the least, I would like to extend a deep sense of appreciation for all the support, timely implementation, and guidance provided by the members of the Entrepreneurship Development Cell. We owe the success of the session to you. Once again, thank you all for tuning it with EDC. Have a pleasant day. All startups are requested to stay back after the meeting. Thank you so
very much. Thank you, everyone, and great being with all of you. Take care. Bye.